Well, good afternoon, folks. You brave souls that want to stay at church even longer on such a beautiful day. Thank you for joining us. And we'll try to make it as quick as possible. It's highly up to you. Glad you all are here. So most of you know, looking at the folks in this room, most of you know and have participated already in conversations around our building and grounds. Many who have served on the property committee or as sextons or staff or have been part of the congregation for a long time know that this is not a new conversation at all. There have been various conversations for several years. That was very evident to me when I candidated here at the property committee and others that we'd be having some big conversations around our building and grounds of major things that we knew needed to be changed and other things that were preferences and how to balance something wider, something that is a more cohesive project. So that's some of the conversation that's been happening. Today, our plan is to highlight, a little overview of how the board sees the process going forward, some initial results of the congregational survey that went out on the building and grounds that hopefully you all took. If not, you could still submit. It's not live exactly, but we could input if there are late surveys. We could still add that to the totals. And then some information from the building visioning team that was asked to go visit a few congregations locally who have recently done a renovation or a new build, and basically go and meet with the folks there, ask them how did the project go and process, what did you learn through it, any things you would suggest to us as we go through our process, and to gain inspiration about how different churches do different things so we're not reinventing the wheel constantly. So a brief parade of churches. So first, most of you know that we come from a long line here. So Greg, yeah, go ahead. A long line of churches here in Rochester, going back 150 years. That's Grace. It's not exactly the first, but close. We had the small chapel before that at the current site of the Plummer Building, and then Grace Universalist Church for 50 years downtown at 2nd and 2nd. And then we moved a block and a block to 3rd and 3rd. First Universalist Church was there for about another 50 years as well, also downtown. And then we came up here, bought around 5 acres of land just off Walden Lane, which we helped name. We had property down to the frontage road and then sold the property that the Jehovah's Witness Church has now to them fairly shortly after that. And then a renovation right around 2000. So coming up on almost 20 years ago, the renovation for the new entrance, accessibility, adding an elevator. Yes, that's right. It replaced that. That's right. So we have been home, and you can sit down if you want, or you can keep parading around. Those were someone from the history committee. Marge, do you know who drew these? Sue Wheeler brought these to me just this. Oh, Jim Kern. There you go. Yes. Sorry, Sue, I didn't see you over there. Good. So the reason that I lift these up and highlight these are just to remember our history and to remember that this is not the only building we've had, and remember that in all of these buildings, people found their spiritual home, which is a beautiful thing about the adaptability of a community and a people to say what the most important thing in any church is, or any religious community, is its people, is its community, is its mission and vision, and there's many containers that can help hold that. In all of these containers, people had weddings and memorials and child dedications and committee meetings and potlucks, no doubt, and Sunday services and 1,000 friendships and connections made. So to honor that as we go through, and that is no different in this space and in this church. So we hold that at the core of anything we do is its mission and vision and how it serves who we want to be in the community, expresses our values by the actual structure and accessibility and hospitality, environmental concerns. All those things are part of the conversation about living our mission and vision in the world. So I'm going to turn it over to our fearless board leaders and be the tech support, part of the tech team.
Just a little historical background. Last fall, we had our first listening session in October. There were about between 50 and 60 folks that attended that. And in January, we had 2 additional listening sessions where we had about 100 people attending those. And there were 3 guiding questions that led us in those sessions. And those questions were, what about our space do you wish to keep the same or at least similar? What about our space do you want to change other than basic maintenance necessities? And then what is your dream? A phrase to describe how you imagine our future space. And so these listening sessions were opportunities for us to open our minds and to hear from each other and to give feedback to the board to give us a sense of what all of you were thinking. And we do have a record of all of those responses. If you'd like to have that, we can make that available to you. But there were key points from those 3 listening sessions. And these are in no rank order. But people are aware of the need for change. People are open to change. People appreciate a place that feels warm and inviting. People want to live more deeply into our values of accessibility and environmental justice. People want more multi-purpose space. People want more light and open spaces for light. And we heard from the youth who want more vibrant spaces that reflect them with good Wi-Fi and technology. And after these sessions, then a building and visioning team was appointed by the board. And the role of this temporary advisory team to the board administrator is to visit other churches, as Luke had mentioned, and bring back reflections from their leadership about their campaigns, their building functionality, and their considerations. And then also to help advise on a process to gather information from the congregation and staff through surveys. And we're going to be sharing the results of that particular recent survey. So in preparation to meet with those churches, we sent out a questionnaire to them. And what we really wanted to know, too, was some of the things in hindsight. If they could only have done something differently, what would they have done? So that maybe we can avoid some future pitfalls. So that we visited 3 congregations so far, the UU Church of Minnetonka, Unity in St. Paul, and White Bear. And this summer we plan to go to Duluth and Iowa City to see what was done there. And these are churches that have either built new or they renovated and remodeled. Team members on this visioning team are Reverend Luke, George Houston, Greg Turasek, Ann Hutton, Carmen Frana, and myself. And so we'll share some highlights from those visits. We did take hundreds of photos, and we're not going to share all of those with you, but we do have them accessible for you. And later this week, there'll be a more expanded PowerPoint of those churches so you can see all of those particular photos, other than the ones that we highlight today. And also, we'll have all the comments from the survey that we're about to share with you, so you can read what everybody had to say in answer to each of those questions. So with that, let us begin. So the first slide that you're going to see is just an overview of our process or plan, and we're in that first column, where we've had some community forums, we visited some churches to gather some information, we've just had the congregational survey, and one of maybe others that will come, and then this focus group today. In the next phase, we'll have additional conversation and a process of discernment with all of you, and then we'll form another Building Our Future team, and from there, a feasibility study will be happening. We will do an analysis of some other information gathering. That might be a time when architects come in to develop some plans. And then in that last phase, in addition to other forums, we'll look at those options that'll be presented to you, and we'll have a congregational vote, and then the capital campaign, and we'll begin the project. So we are a long way from there, but this is where we are today. And the Building and Grounds Survey, the next slide. So far, we have 204 responses. That was shared with 370 members of our congregation and 155 friends of the congregation. This was an anonymous survey, so we don't know who were congregants and who were friends that answered it, but we did get a really good response. And we'll begin with those responses, and Ann will start with the next slide.
So it was the decision that we would not just limit the survey to members, because every single day this church is used by and supported by our friends. Those are individuals who may have been friends for many, many years. They're friends who might become members. So we wanted everyone's opinion. So their survey was actually, the electronic link was shared with everyone who is on our e-news distribution. So 370 members, 155. 2 surveys were handed in on paper. The rest all did electronically, which was much easier for tabulation because SurveyMonkey produced the marvelous graphs that we have. So the first graph is, what do you appreciate or like about our building? And keeping in mind that people were not limited to one choice. This was not a ranking of your choices. People could check 1, they could check 5, they could check all. Interestingly enough, of the 204 responses, no one who opened up and clicked on the survey decided to skip a question. So each question was answered by each of the 204 people. So looking at this, the top priority was the hearth room, followed by outdoor space, unique structure, sanctuary, commons, cozy, comfortable spaces, the classroom wing, and then other. And then with under other, there were 38 additional comments. Interestingly, of that hearth room, 63% or 129 people rank that as something that they like about our current building, which interestingly enough, having sat through the forums that we had earlier, the hearth room in those spaces that say that it makes me feel like a family, that there are places in this building, despite maybe the concrete block that maybe might not look so friendly, there are places in this building that people feel friendly and welcome. Next slide. So this, I have to say then, looking at the comments, you all did your job well. This was about visioning. What do I like about the building? What would I like about the future? There were not a lot of comments, almost none in fact, that were like, well, I'd like this if we had enough money. It was all about dreams and wishes and the future, and knowing that, as Gail pointed out, this is a sequential process and we're at the beginning, and yes, we need to be good stewards of our money, but we're not there yet. So what improvements would you like about our building? Number 1, with 150 responses, 75.53% want more natural light in the sanctuary. Then the next one at 67.65, so basically 67.7% of the people, 138 people want an updated kitchen. So if you've worked in the kitchen, you know why. If you haven't worked in the kitchen, work in the kitchen and you will understand that response. It's amazing what we do with the space that we have, but updated would be better. Followed by increased environmental efficiency, more usable green space, more accessibility, and one-level spaces, sanctuary, easier pathways. Those of you who came in as we were getting ready noticed Shelley and Anne-Leen moving around the sanctuary, measuring where Shelley can't go because of her electric chair. I mean, there are just places in this church that is accessible as we've tried to make it. She can't go there because her wheelchair doesn't go there. Improved parking, more flexible multi-use space, and updated restrooms, including non-gender. And then larger gathering spaces for larger events, such as concerts, forums, receptions. And even that question, or that response, and had favorable ranking by 80 respondents. Next slide. How do you feel about our property, building location, mark all that apply? So again, this is where people were willing to maybe step outside the box, and the highest response with 127 people, 63% said that they were willing to move. You're not there yet, but just willing to even consider it. I'm open to having some shared spaces, came in second. I want to stay centrally located in Rochester, was third. I want to stay this location, whether we rebuild or renovate. And I want to keep or renovate our current building with 25%, 51 people. So there's a lot of options as to looking at what is our mission and what kind of space do we need in order to accomplish that mission. Questions about survey? The very first question was, the green? I am open to moving to a different location. Followed by, I am open to having some shared space with value-aligned partners. Third is I want to stay centrally located. Fourth, I want to stay in this location whether we renovate or rebuild. And then before we get to other, which was 8 people, I want to keep and renovate our current building. So as Gail mentioned, we're going to make the survey data available. The survey just closed, so these are preliminary results. The charts are all nicely created in the software in SurveyMonkey. We will be making the comments available, and some other data analysis will be available on the website.
We are also recording this session, so you'll be able to review it and take a look later as well, and we'll make that available to you. So the next slide, Luke. So these are the churches that we visited, and if we go to the next one, just to give you a comparison on the churches and in comparison to size and their operating budgets, the Church of Minnetonka, which was the church in Wayzata, and then they bought some property from a congregant, tore the house down, and then spent 4 years in court, realizing they couldn't build there because of the zoning laws, but they finally won the court case. But their operating budget is $280,000. Their cost of their building that they built was $4.5 million, and that building is about 11,000 square feet. To give you an idea of that size, the living space in the Plummer House is 11,000 square feet. So once they finished the building, they realized it was a little too small. We'll show you some pictures of those. But the site is beautiful that they built on. And then we went to Unity in St. Paul. They have 850 members, but they serve a few thousand people in that community. And their operating budget each year is $1.5 million. Their project cost in renovating the existing building, because they chose to stay there, was $8 million, so significantly higher. And that was done in 2011 and 2012. And then White Bear, and Luke will be able to share more information on that as his former church. They have 729 members. Their yearly budget is $900,000. They had 2 renovation series, and we'll show you on the floor plan their first original part of the church, and then to build the sanctuary and some additional hall space and things from the sanctuary and foyer space. That was between $2.5 and $3 million for that sanctuary. And then later, they had to do, and that was in 2008, or 2006 and 2007. And then in 2016, they upgraded their whole HVAC system, and that was $1.5 million to do that. Yeah? What?
Everybody from the peanut gallery.
Oh,
Do you want to list Rochester? Is it for comparison?
oh,
What we are? Most
Oh,
folks know, but not everybody would.
so,
Want me?
sure, we're at like 370
370.
members?
Annual
ahead.
operating budget around 530 or so.
530,000.
For the coming year. Oh, and no building projects.
Yeah.
How big is the square footage here?
Oh, I don't know. That's a good question. I don't know the square footage here.
We'll look that up.
We'll look that up.
Raised through capital campaigns?
It's a combination of capital campaigns and finance through mortgage.
Yeah.
Can I make a request? If we're recording this, could you repeat the question so that you can...
Oh, sure, okay. So we did have a question on what our square footage was for our building, and we'll find out the answer to that.
And then there was a question on how much of those financial figures were part of a capital campaign or fundraised, and it was a combination. I think in all of them. I know at least Unity and White Bear was a combination of both a capital campaign and financing. And once you start a consultation process, which would be the second column, second phase in this, they would be talking about feasibility studies and sustainable mortgage amounts per your budget and different things for suggestions like that.
Any other questions about those? Yeah.
Unity and White Bear, that was on existing property because they did not move. So when you see the 4.5 million for Minnetonka, I think they said they spent about $600,000 for their property. So that was kind of a budget bill, you know, when you net off the land.
Mm-hmm. And even though they were in a court case, they had a pro bono attorney, so they didn't have any legal fees to help them through. But it shows what careful planning can help avoid if you enter into a project. So the next slide, I think, is we have a combination of some small videos that we can show you, and then we will share some additional slides.
I think people are really happy with the building. The wall of windows in the sanctuary is just incredible. So you really have that sense of being that close and that into nature. That's the really wonderful thing about this side of the.
Am I on? Yeah. This is the best part.
We're really happy with the building.
It's not.
We have no architecture.
This is not a coordinated attempt to convince you of building needs. Don't mind the leaking roof in a few moments.
But it does show that you need an entire congregation for a church village.
That's right. Yeah, it does. A short delay.
While we wait, if you have any posing questions, we can take them. The videos are well worth it, but we do have an additional PowerPoint that we could load up to show pictures if none of this works. We could, right now. Okay.
Are the videos on their church website, or did you have to get them special?
The question is, are the videos on their church website? And
If you go to Focus Architects, I found them on the architects' websites.
Just in case.
No, we did them. No, the architects did them.
But when we start putting all of this information together, we'll post links on our website so that you can only have to go to one location and not remember the names of the.
We're waiting for the camera to come back. I'm sorry, the projector to come back.
well, while we wait for the Minnetonka video to appear, it is on a beautiful wooded acre lot. After they built their church, they realized that they didn't have enough parking. The church itself is located off of a frontage road off of the freeway, so they're already short on parking space. And as they went through their process, they ended up cutting quite a few things. So they don't have a very large gathering space. They have a foyer that leads into their sanctuary and off of their kitchen, but they couldn't host a Wednesday night dinner, for example, or even a wedding reception because there isn't the space. They have beautiful RE space that they've planned for. And beautiful green space. And a new build.
So one of the things they tried to do is the things that needed to be built in, they went ahead and did. So they have a goal of wanting a commercial kitchen. So while their stove right now is just your typical appliance, the fan, the exhaust fan that had to be built into the shell of the building, that was commercial grade. So as they had to make these choices to what to keep and what to cut, they tried to make them in a manner that they could easily build and grow to.
And their sanctuary, as you'll see in the picture, is just about the size of our sanctuary, but they have a lot of nice outdoor lights, so you'll see that on that
I
video.
think people are really happy with the building. The wall of windows in the sanctuary is just incredible. So you really have that sense of being that close and that into nature. That's the really wonderful thing about this side of the building. And you really don't think about the freeway being there.
It's wonderful being in this new building. The building itself is full of light and open. It certainly is more spacious than what we had. Having a large kitchen that more than one person can be in at a time. The meeting rooms downstairs are a delight to be in. We've taken the wood from the trees that were here, the old tree, and used that to panel one of the rooms downstairs, and it's just lovely. So it's wonderful to have a building that people want to be in and enjoy how they feel when they're here.
Their chancel is accessible too, which was a nice feature of their planning, with a nice ramp up behind the altar. So the next is Unity of St. Paul. We don't have a particular video, but we'll just show you some floor plans of that congregation. The main level you can see on the upper right hand is their sanctuary, and on the left are administrative areas and offices. They changed the direction when they made the addition. It's the new entry on the lower right-hand side. And so they changed the street address. Is that correct, Luke? Is that what they did? And reoriented the entrance to the church. And then they do have an upper wing where they have their similar thing to their chapel. They have wonderful music space and other meeting areas and warm, cozy, family-centered areas. They have a balcony in their sanctuary, yes, and you'll see a picture of that. We do have some actual photos there. And then the lower level is the religious education wing, all the way from nursery to special rooms even for coming of age. So it's a very large, expansive area for their religious education wing.
Building sits on a 4.5-acre site.
There are some community pictures.
Yeah, we have some other pictures that'll follow after these videos. So the next one is White Bear Universalist, Unitarian Universalist.
Most of which is wetland and protected woodland. And so the architectural challenge was to make a beautiful space that sits lightly on the land, that incorporates the old building, a kind of conventional 1959 church structure in a very suburban neighborhood, but make it a congregational space fit for the 21st century. The trees from which these boards came actually stood right here. And that somewhat mitigated the loss and is a constant reminder. All of these living things are part of us and we're part of them. The outdoors is inside here with us. This little stream here, part of the Browns Creek watershed, was invisible to us before this space was created. Paul and Wynn both saw that this is actually the central artery of our whole experience here. This is a very acoustically friendly space for spoken voice, for musical instruments, for recorded music. The combination of wood, which softens everything, and the hard surfaces is exactly right. And although it's a big space, especially height is big, it's also a space that holds the sound at a human scale. It's a beautiful space that way. What's surprising now that it is 10 years that we have lived here is that it feels new all the time. We're discovering things that the building has to say to us about not only how to live in it, but how to be in it.
And the White Bear Church it's all one level, everything, which makes it very accessible. Here's their floor plan. Maybe Luke, you want to highlight some of the things.
Sure, you can see a little bit. On the bottom left is the sanctuary that comes off, and then the social hall, which is the old sanctuary, which is just across the way. In between, you saw a little bit of that atrium space. And both the social hall and the atrium are used as flexible space. Occasionally, if there was a special forum or concert during their Wednesday night programming, or a special guest speaker that they needed the social hall for because choir was practicing in the sanctuary. Then they had enough space in the atrium lobby area to have about 10 tables for the dinner. So they'd still have the dinner in between. So it was used for a variety of things. So there's lots of flexible space there. And the one level aspect made it very easy for, wide hallways and easy accessibility and wayfinding in religious education, and a clear sense when you come in the front door of where to go as well, and some welcoming stations there.
Can you show them where the alcove is? That was part of it.
Oh yeah.
Is it? Or
Where's the front door?
So on the upper left is an alcove. And that's a windowed wall end of the hallway. And just out that door is that stream that Victoria was speaking about, and woodland. And that was a space where we'd have new member gatherings. You could fit about 30 people or so in a circle in that area. It was similar to our hearth room in some ways, in that it was part of a common community space, but it was at the end of the hallway, so you could kind of block it off a little and have a conversation there. The front door is right here. So this is a little courtyard down in this bottom right corner where it says exit. That's the main door. And you come right into where the welcome center is in that area. The parking lot is over here. And so there's a main sidewalk that goes up there.
It's on a flat
Yeah.
land.
And they couldn't do a basement because it's marshland.
They do have a semi-permeable parking lot, but there's some maintenance involved with that because it has to be, since it's filtered, then they have to clean it out underneath. And that they were in the process of going to do that. So that's kind of, they have to vacuum out underneath the parking lot to clear out all the sand and things that have gone through.
So since we're on the topic of parking, do we want to, no, let's look at the pictures first, and then I'll come back to my parking comment.
And right above the old, in the fellowship hall, which was the old church, directly above that is their kitchen, and they spoke about doing another renovation in the future to make that larger.
Where are the offices?
The offices are, if you look right on the bottom of the picture, that little square box right at the lower center, that's the administrative area. But the program offices are kind of right in the middle of that floor plan. Question?
From just looking at the front elevation of the sanctuary, it appeared to have a flat roof. Is that true?
Yes, they do have, it's a sloped roof. So from the outside, it looks flat. It's got those short pirouettes or whatever they're called, right? Those little walls. And then had a partial slope. Also on the roof of the sanctuary, there are solar panels, which have to be shoveled off every once in a while. But they haven't, so it's been there just over 10 years and they haven't had any leaking issues. But yeah, flat roof on that part of the building and most of it.
Oh, wait, Kathy.
Are any of the spaces that you have pictures and then the two that you still have yet to see, are any of them shared spaces, groups that have their shared values?
Unity is in a situation where they basically are willing to be open 24/7. And while we were there visiting, there were a number of community groups that are partnered with the church but are not church groups that were there that day. The place was unbelievably busy the day that we were there.
And there are some, White Bear used to have a small Montessori school that rented out their RE space during the week. The school itself disbanded while I was there, but they were open to that. And Unity also has some nonprofit offices, like One Voice Mixed Chorus, which is a LGBTQ choir in the Twin Cities, has their office space at Unity. Minnetonka, no, they don't have enough space. Yeah.
Do any of these have sanctuary space for immigrants?
White Bear and Unity have sanctuary space, and both have guests at this time.
So where approximately then, where is their sanctuary space there in White Bear?
At the very end of the corridor, at the upper right hand, so we walked down the corridor, we looked in all the various classrooms, and we could only go so far because their guests were occupying. It was private, it's their home.
And this church is also a green sanctuary church. Okay, so we can go to the next one. Here's just some other pictures of sanctuary spaces. So that was the sanctuary in Minnetonka.
The wood behind the wall of the sanctuary is actually wood that was from the trees that had to be cut down on the land when they demolished the house and then started building the church space.
The chairs that are in the sanctuary was kind of interesting. They purchased those from another church. I can't remember if the church was redoing things, but they got those chairs for $20 a piece. And they're really, really nice chairs. It doesn't show up in the slide, but another interesting thing they did, they have a lot of plays that they present at this church, so they put in theater lighting in the ceiling, which is the first time I'd seen that. When you're in there, you can kind of tell by this, it's kind of a minimalist. I don't want to say low budget, but it's not, stark, it's white, kind of contemporary. It's a beautiful view out the left side there is through the window. The right side, they have artwork by members and friends of the church, and that would be on the freeway side, just as kind of a sound barrier.
When we get to the common space, I'll point out the fact that they have an easy way to expand the seating.
That's the sanctuary inside Unity. So that's facing the chancel. The chancel, interestingly enough, is not accessible at all. And then the seating is fixed, there are pews, and that's the back view with the organ in their sanctuary.
This is their sanctuary, and it is as we saw it 3 weeks ago. Keeping in mind that Unity was originally built in 1905, so they've made changes and adaptations to a building that's over 100 years old.
One other aspect, so the sanctuary did not change other than they added sprinkling and they refurbished the wood beams. They had plans written for the possibility of a new sanctuary that would have been off, and this would have been their gathering social space. But they would have had to raise or borrow another $5 million. And the entrance is different. Yep.
I was looking at the history a little bit, and they had a major fire in the sanctuary in, I think it was 1963. So that pretty well gutted that. So that's when they redid a lot of the things that Luke is talking about as far as the beams. It's a beautiful, open, kind of a traditional look, but yet I think they kind of combine some contemporary and very clean aesthetic in there as well.
Was from the fire. The skylight wasn't there before the fire, so it burned a hole in the roof, and they're like, we will put a skylight in where they burned the roof.
Well, and that's the interior of the White Bear Sanctuary. It is quite beautiful and quite warm, kind of an embracing feeling. They do have a balcony in the top and that overlooks the sanctuary. And that's where their choir is. There's a picture there. In the back of the sanctuary, there's a space, a quiet space, kind of a quiet room then for, beyond those little alcoves, for children who are a little restless that can still participate. And then there's a door, you can't really see it very clearly, but it's right behind the pulpit, right sort of, if you look centered on the pulpit, there's a door, and then there's a ramp that goes from behind there so that that chancel is accessible.
What is the ceiling?
Wood panels. Wood panels and lighting.
Something that was really nice there is the way the windows are framed. It's not just one huge massive or multiple massive sheets of glass. And they have windows on both sides of the sanctuary with just gorgeous views. You can kind of tell from there. I think I thing.
So are they on the north and south sides, or are they east and west?
East and west. And then on the choir loft, maybe, can you flip to that again, the next slide? We had mixed feelings on that. You know, some people, just the concept of having the choir up behind you, I mean, look at the people on the main floor, they have to stand up and turn around to see them singing. On the other hand, someone like, oh, okay. But that's what would happen if they were singing up there. On the other hand, someone like me could join Walden Hill and they'd never know who was off key. So it was accessible by an elevator. It's a pretty steep pitch looking down, and a view down from above into the sanctuary was really spectacular.
The windows, any things flying into it?
Well,
Right. So Kathy was wondering if we had anything fly into the windows at White Bear. So I was there for 5 years and only once. So luckily we had what is that, ornithologist? Ornithologist? Yes. Yeah, the bird scientist, yeah. Who was in the congregation, and so they worked on how to help that bird find a different place to attack, because it was like thinking of its reflection was a predator. But other than that, no. And the angle of the building, even though they are east-west basically windows, it isn't direct sunlight on either side. So I'd say there was maybe a week in either end of the year where there was a little bit of extra or too much light, but normally not for the morning services. It was for evening gatherings or things like that.
How about heating that, being the practical sort here with two sides glass windows? Were you comfortable most of the time?
Yeah, so the question was about heating a place with glass windows. So the windows were, they're a little over 10 years old, so moderately efficient. And there was baseboard heating on the bottom of both sides, so that it kept that glass and metal warmed up fairly well. That was updated. Even the HVAC in the sanctuary was updated as part of their secondary project to all hot water rather than electric baseboards.
Just a reminder, this is a church that had LEED certification. They proudly display it as you walk in the front door. So I'm assuming that the windows are enough triple pane to justify their certification.
And just one more question, having gone through this winter and learned about snow load on roofs and what can happen, any issues? I'm sorry, I can't remember the pitch of this church's roof, or any issues with the roof?
So this church has a moderately flat roof, a slight slope up on the roof for drainage. But no, there weren't any issues. It hasn't leaked at all. I don't know about this past winter, but no winters before that did they have to shovel anything other than the photovoltaics, the solar panels up there. But other than that, I think it's similar to kind of other larger commercial buildings in town that, you know, have flat roofs, or schools and that. You just kind of have to watch it.
This was the kitchen in the Minnetonka area, and as Ann had mentioned, they did plan ahead for adding some commercial things later on. And if you look outside through the kitchen windows, that's the foyer, and then you go right into the sanctuary. So it's very small. So that's what they had to sacrifice in their space. This is Unity's commercial kitchen. The walk-in refrigerator was, what, $900,000 for that alone? Don't scare people. Sorry, but they do a lot of community work. It's commercial grade. So and this is White Bear's kitchen that they hope to make larger. It's not quite as easy to get around as they would like. Go ahead.
On the Unity kitchen, it was kind of interesting. They had the $8 million budget, and not to scare anyone, but the kitchen project was $1.5 million of that. And a lot of the reason, that it's hard to get your hands around that, but they had very good equipment there, and he told us it actually used to be quite a bit larger as far as the footprint, and it got to be where there were too many people in there, and it was kind of disruptive, so they actually decreased the footprint. So the $1.5 million is not just kitchen equipment. I mean, it's the infrastructure, it's putting in new walls, it was plumbing, it was a lot of things. It was throughout that whole building, that $8 million, I mean, most of it, when we were looking at it, was really infrastructure improvements, in addition to the new entrance on the outside.
This just gives an example of some of the meeting spaces in Minnetonka. They really planned their RE space well outside of each of the RE rooms. There are double closets for each room, so there's plenty of storage.
Again, I'll draw your attention to the wooden wall. This is in what they consider their boardroom or their conference room. Unlike the wall in the sanctuary that they had stained black or charcoal gray, they left this wood natural. So this is, again, wood that had been reclaimed from the forest. This is walking. In the top middle, you have entered Unity on a accessible entryway. You either go straight ahead into the sanctuary, or you can access the elevators, or you take the stairs, and the entire downstairs, as Gail pointed out earlier, is the RE wing. So you've got nursery space, specific areas, a corridor for smaller children, and then corridors for a corridor for the larger kids.
They have lots of egress windows.
So the question is, egress windows, yes, they have lots of windows. Egress windows. So then this is White Bear, as Gail pointed out earlier from the floor plan. The entire facility is on one level, leading from the sanctuary and the common entrance to the classrooms. This is Gail's reminding me that's White Bear's storage for RE, and also then just an additional meeting room for small groups. Aren't you glad you're in this safe space? Carmen.
One of the things at Unity that I had noticed was for the RE classes, including OWL, they all had their own room. So even for the OWL classes, they could leave up their posters and everything that they've been working on instead of having to take it down every time. So every class, every youth group, everything had its separate room and really dedicated to letting the kids make it their own room.
So this is Minnetonka, and this is where I was asking you to remember. So the very far end of the picture is the concrete wall, the wood wall that's charcoal gray, and then the sanctuary chairs with these very large doors that then we have a picture that we can share on the website, which with all the doors open, right there. But thinking about those times when you have a large memorial service, a wedding, whatever it is where we need more chairs on one location, the space, the sanctuary space just then can spill out into the entryway. But it is small. This space that you see in the foreground, that's it. I don't know that you could maybe put up 5 tables for a meal, maybe? And the kitchen is to the right, just beyond this brown wooden table. This is the gathering space at Unity. Gail's reminding me that it's about the size of our commons.
That's just another view of their meeting space, or their fellowship hall in Unity, and that's a view looking back into their kitchen. And as George pointed out, it's a much smaller footprint than originally it was. And then White Bear, you can see that was their original church, and that is their fellowship hall. And then this other space is just going down the hall from the sanctuary to the RE wing, and that's used for other kind of gatherings at White Bear.
That's that alcove.
Yeah.
At the upper left of the diagram.
Yep, yeah. Just the bird question, on the right-hand picture, it's a little bit hard to see there, but they had vertical cords or strings on the outside of the windows as part of stopping the birds from flying into the windows. But this alcove being part of the new sanctuary space, it was really nice. I mean, you just had a real nice forest view there. Small groups, you could either head into the old original sanctuary after a service or, you know, sit down. They had tables set up kind of for small group where it was a lot quieter.
I thought I'd get closer. If you go back to the Wayzata one real quick, one thing that they do have right outside, they have if you go to the windows right there, they have a really nice deck back. And they said a lot of times that's where they go after their service. Below they have a lot of running space for kids, and so a lot of times out there after, that's kind of where they have their coffee and talks while their kids are kind of running down there. And so it kind of helps them with that smaller space inside, but probably not in the winter. Oh, yeah, well, I was kind of looking a lot at the RE because I do a lot with the RE program here. Almost all of them had much larger classrooms. If you noticed in one of the pictures, they had 2 tables and then a big rug and then a whole nother place where there's shelves where we basically can get 1 table in our classrooms and really not a lot of places for them to sit on the floor. And then on the outside, every room had a huge closet for their art supplies and different things that they use. So every room, every grade had their own supplies and space to store them. It was really set up nicely.
So if you have some specific questions about RE and reflections there, ask Carmen, because that was her area of interest, and George was really interested in the mechanics of all of the spaces too, so on the mechanical pieces with the HVAC and so on. But we'll have all of the pictures available for you to see on the upcoming, probably this weekly e-news, I think. We're hoping to have another PowerPoint for you that's ready so that you can view some additional pictures that show other things besides the kitchen and the sanctuary and some RE spaces, so you get a flavor for the buildings. But this is just a reminder of the overview of our planning process that's happening, and that we're just still in those initial ground phases and hearing from you and hearing your thoughts.
We touched briefly on parking at the beginning. Minnetonka, the new construction, they used a ratio of 1 parking stall to every 3 members, and it was not nearly enough. I mean, they were having problems with any kind of a social or community event there. They were parking on the frontage road, on the front lawn of the church, and their parking lot, unfortunately, it's brand new, but it's 2 levels, so you had to go upstairs from the lower lot to get up to the main level to go into the church, so that part wasn't real good. Unity, it's right in the middle of, old historic St. Paul neighborhood. They probably had 15 to 20 parking stalls or spots at the church. And otherwise, if you're driving a car coming there, you had to park in the neighborhood to get into the church. White Bear Lake, they're constrained. They don't have enough parking in their lot. So what they set up, I think the school's about half a mile away. They have shuttle buses when the parking lot is full. So they were, what do they run, every 10, 15 minutes? Yep.
A little shuttle thing in their windshield.
Yep. And then Gail talked about the semi-permeable parking lot at White Bear. Here's what I do in my spare time. I went and looked at the Minnesota Stormwater Manual. So they recommend, it's not code, but it's like what Gail was saying, that every year you have to do it. You should be doing it twice, once at the end of the fall, to get all the leaves and debris that's dropped, and then once at the end of the winter because of all the debris that's left over then. And it's actually, it's not your normal vacuum cleaner. I mean, you're pulling up some of that surface aggregate and having to separate the sediment and everything else, and then redeposit the aggregate down. So just, everyone thinks it's a great concept, but there's a lot of maintenance associated with that. And when I heard that, this is just my personal opinion, I like the concept of asphalt, and then you go you run it off into a rain garden. So anyway, I don't know.
So are there other questions on any of these things, any of these particular buildings, or anything about what was shared or shown, not about those buildings, but about ideas or questions you have for this team or the process, or things you want to know? Yeah, I got two.
There is a mention about solar at one of the churches. Had any of the others done things? And I know White Bear did some green initiative things, but I was wondering about Minnetonka and Unity.
I didn't.
I think it was just White Bear, and it was kind of a supplemental. They had a nice system in, they were monitoring it and recording it. I mean, it's obviously not 100%, but that's probably part of the green certification. I'm not sure about Unity. And then Minnetonka would not have had it just because their budget was so tight.
One of the churches we haven't visited yet, the one in Duluth, actually has a green roof. So they have a natural prairie on their roof. So once we visit there, we can get you all more information about that.
I had a question about the processes that these churches went through before embarking. So we're talking about how we're early in our process. What were their processes like, and did they have recommendations, or what if, wish we had done this or that?
So when we met with the individual at White Bear, he was very knowledgeable about the church itself, but admitted that he was not the expert on finances. So, and the changes were made before Luke's tenure, correct? Or you knew?
I was there in the midst of the HVAC.
When we went to Unity, we had a different circumstance. We ended up meeting with one of their co-ministers, Rob Eller Isaac. member. He has been here and has preached here. We also met with one of their people who was their project coordinator, and they gave us a lot of helpful information about their process. Their community, congregation went through a process to say whether they would stay or go, or stay and go, which is renovate. And they went through a multiple year investigation and community analysis.
And I think the person they used, was she a member of the church? Right. The consultant that they used that conducted their feasibility study was a member of their congregation who does this professionally. So that gave them a lot of information and a lot of useful things. And once they reached a consensus in their particular church of 75% of the members agreeing to a plan, then they voted to proceed with that capital campaign.
And Minnetonka, I don't remember. We met with a husband and wife that were, again, very involved in church activities. But it might have just been, it was the end of the day, and I don't remember what their process was.
Okay, you didn't hear any of this. So they actually went through, it was about a 20-year process. What I found out, the first 10 years were just discussion about, are we going to do this, aren't we? It was kind of it sounded like a general discussion. And then the next 5 years were really what Gail mentioned about initially was the lawsuit and finding the property and the land. Because that lot that they're in Wayzata, it was not zoned where you could put up a church. So that took about 5 years. But then after they secured that, my understanding is the actual, okay, let's get going, if the feasibilities, everything else was approximately the last 5 years.
To put that into comparison, the last time we went through our capital campaign, we started with long-range planning and visioning, and then through the feasibility study and actual construction and completion. That was almost 5 years.
The last thing I was going to say about process. So this process here is modeled after the person we met with at Unity. So Laura Lee Wedderstrom, who does this professionally in project management, worked at the University of Minnesota for a lot of their buildings that they built. And so brought forth this, as well as Laura Park, who's the director of Unity Consulting, which consults nationally with other congregations. So we got to meet with all of them. And this process focuses on a few things. One, to do what we're doing now, community visioning, and then to get into that middle ground between jollity and gloom. Of information gathering and getting more specific information so that before you get to any major proposals or a congregational meeting and vote, you see towards the bottom there, including cost analysis. So you'd work with engineering and architectural consultants to look at your space or look at the costs of trying to find new land and building and getting some not specific like schematics, but giving some overarching possibilities. This is what you're looking for. And then you do a feasibility study and see how big that gap is, and then have some more discussions. And that's why community forums happen at all three stages. But there was also a sense that once you move to the next stage, you're going to end up having a 20 or 30-year process if you have to go back to the one before. So you want to make sure to give each stage enough time. And especially once you make a congregational vote, you want to move forward with that project unless something, devastating or really game-changing happens.
So when you enter that second phase, and you're getting engineers and architects, you run into costs. So you don't do that for free. So you have to build that into, if the plan is to go ahead, and you do have fees associated with architects and engineers, so you have to plan for that. That becomes something that you have to build into your budget. So it's not, we start running into costs before you get to that third step.
That's correct. That's correct. And all of that needs to be built in and planned. And with each phase, when we were speaking with folks at Unity, for example, with each scenario that was developed, they looked at what obstacles they had to overcome, whether they were going to move or rebuild or do whatever, and then how for all of them is how are they going to fulfill the mission in their building? And what is it, who are they and who do they serve? And so those clear definitions were there, and as the process evolved, it became clear to the congregation what direction they should go. But Linda's right, yes, we do have to have money built into our budget for those architectural consultations.
This year's budget, next year's budget, or when are we, I mean, we're talking about it, so.
So Julie was asking if it started for this year's budget, and I would say that'd be putting the cart before the horse, because I think right now we're trying to gauge the temperature and the will of the congregation to see with the survey, but also with, you know, those focus group conversations that are listed at the bottom, and that's not like sequential, that all these things happen at the same time, but for community visioning is to meet with, all right, let's meet with RE teachers, and let's meet with hospitality teams, let's meet with the staff, let's meet with whatever, all these groups, to get further input and comment on the survey and some of that analysis to really get a sense of what is the will of this community and how are we moving forward before we, because I think if we started putting money into it first, that would assume too much about where the congregation wanted to go.
And to put it in perspective, when we did this for our own building 20 years ago, and it took us about 5 years, part of that was all built into that process too, raising money and paying for those plans and reaching that type of consensus. So we're a long way off from there, but you know, knowing that we're not going to go 20 years, we're going to make some decision before then. But it is part of a process, and just to be patient as we go, and we'll be as transparent as we can as we go through this process. But it's important to hear from all of you and how you feel and what we're going to be doing. And the last time we had the feasibility study, we had a consultant from the UUA who conducted that here. They came very close to what they thought we could raise potentially, and they estimated we could raise ourselves without a mortgage about $850,000 to put in the elevator and change the elevation and the entrance to the building. And we raised about don't quote me, 60,000, I think, something like that, and then we financed the rest. But that was about a $1.2 million project at that time, 20 years ago. So we'll just have to put things in perspective and see where we go. But it's an exciting adventure, I think, and the possibilities for all of us here.
And that mortgage is paid off.
Right, that mortgage is done. So we can finance a whole lot now. Thank you, Linda, for pointing that out. Now we're well on our way. Right, exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
That was very nice.
It was very nice. Set the stage for all of that. Any other questions that any of you have? Okay, we'll be looking for the photos and things with the PowerPoints and information and comments in the weekly e-news. I think there'll be a link there. Oh.
So on your way out, you can start getting up. I'm a minister, so I do ministerial things. I want you to place a hand on one of the walls of the congregation. So stand up and move to an edge and place one of your hands on one of these bricks or a flower or a banner, or not the Saltzmans, but. And feel in these walls the history of 150 years. Over 50 that have been in this space, 100 that were downtown, and dreams and visions before that. And feel what is to come next, what dreams and hopes for, as one of our hymns says, the children of our children. Are we building and dreaming of now? What house will they live in? How it will be different, how will it be the same, and how will it be guided by our vision and our mission and our love and grace. Go with that blessing, and thank you for being here. Amen. about a year ago, I was at your house for Soul Food, wasn't it? Wasn't it on the spring? I forget what it was. But I remember it was raining. It was raining that day. In the spring. Yeah. Well, enjoy the day. Good to see you. Thank you. Figure it out. Oh, wow.
Full screens is.
Great job, you did a good job.
We'll take your retirement.
Well, the only shift is that it was a new bathroom. That was the only thing I. Yes, the wireless. Yeah. The wireless thinking more practically is one thing being right. Yeah. And that church. Well, this one, that just was.
Well, that's good too. One is sitting where you're sitting is yeah. But I don't know. There's any
right. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Yeah, I'll keep trying that wireless one. I was telling Jay that I tried it that one time. And it just went straight to it slopes down. So I put in a little thing and put it in and it didn't automatically do it. So so I have to sound system. Yeah. And then it comes up with that IP address. That one. I think the next one I haven't tried it since now. See if there's any other little troubleshoots. Yeah, because if we're on top. Yeah, figure it out. Yeah.